Hi, it's Katrina! Volcano sharks. The Southwest Pacific Ocean is filled with underwater volcanoes, with Cavachi being one of the most active. The entire area surrounding the volcano is brimming with hot and acidic seawater, so dangerous that human divers don't dare go down there. And that's when the volcano isn't erupting. When it does erupt, the waters get even deadlier. Despite the volatility of the area, the Cavachi volcano is home to a group of sharks. A team of scientists with National Geographic recently sent robots down into the dangerous waters equipped with cameras, discovering not only a few animals surviving in the toxic environment, but a shocking amount of biodiversity. Researchers witnessed silky sharks, hammerhead sharks, and even Pacific sleeper sharks, all living in the volcanic waters. The Pacific sleeper sharks were especially surprising to see because these sharks have only been caught on video twice before. The volcano itself is located near the Solomon Islands, and it is extremely active. Its last minor eruption was in 2014, and there were two explosive outbursts before that, one in 2007 and one in 2004. According to Brennan Phillips with the National Geographic team, nobody even knows how often the volcano really erupts because it's so difficult to study. Phillips also says it's shocking that so many sharks are living in the volcano, and it's made his team wonder just what kind of extreme environments the animals have adapted to over millions of years. Flamingos of the Altiplano. The Bolivian Altiplano is like a landscape from another planet. It's a desert plain high up in the mountains of the Andes, complete with smoldering volcanoes, crumbling rock formations, pits of boiling mud, and the occasional snowstorm. The peaks of the Andes Mountains loom in the background, while sandwiched between two imposing volcanoes is a lagoon the color of spilled blood. It's truly a remarkable place, almost like a lake of liquid fire, thousands of feet above the ground with smoking volcanoes surrounding its shores. But what makes it really amazing is that it is home to hundreds upon hundreds of beautiful pink flamingos. The lagoon is called the Colored Lagoon or the Laguna Colorada, and it has an extraordinarily high salt content. It's sprinkled with white islands of borax, alkaline salt deposits, and the water is only about 3 feet deep. The lagoon has also been a staple in Bolivian folklore for centuries. The ancient people of the Andes, before the Europeans arrived, believed the lagoon held the blood of the gods. In contrast, modern scientists believe the red color comes from algae and minerals in the water. But whatever makes the water red, it is still home to some seriously brave flamingos. The flamingos are drawn to the Blood Lagoon because it offers a nearly limitless supply of plankton. 3 out of 6 known flamingo species live here: the Chilean flamingo, the Andean flamingo, and the James flamingo. The James flamingo is so rare that it was declared extinct for a brief time before a small population was found near the Red Salt Lagoon in 1956. If you've ever wondered why flamingos are pink, it's because of the red algae and plankton in these types of salt lakes where they mostly feed. It stains their feathers and turns them a reddish-pink color, when in reality flamingos are born a dull gray. Lava lizards. Lava lizards are a fascinating species of reptile that live across the Galapagos archipelago. There are 7 different species of lava lizard in the Galapagos Islands that all belong to the genus Microlophus, with 15 other species found throughout the Pacific coast of South America. They kind of look like iguanas and can be found in large groups. They spend most of their time sunbathing on the top of lava, and that's where the lava lizards get their name. Of course, the lava lizards aren't actually lying on hot lava, but on the rough surface of the islands. For those who don't know, the Galapagos Islands are technically volcanoes. They were formed from fire and lava, molten basalt lava to be specific. They are a group of shield volcanoes and lava plateaus, and lava frequently oozes out of the volcanoes in slow, almost hypnotic flows. Once the lava dries, the lava lizards come to bask in the warmth. These lizards are the most abundant reptile found in the Galapagos. Scientists believe they evolved from a single ancestor millions of years ago, just like Darwin's famous finches. And then each developed unique traits based on which island they live on. The Quito rocket frog. The Quito rocket frog is native to the country of Ecuador. and like many of the most spectacular animals of South America, it's at a high risk for extinction. To make matters worse, the Quito rocket frog lives near the cone of a volcano that is ready to erupt at any moment. Scientists say that if the volcano erupts, it will most likely incinerate the last remaining frogs of the species. It wasn't always this way. The frogs used to live all over the Andes Mountains in Ecuador, but now they have been reduced to the small environment on the banks of the Pita River, right in the path of a potential lava flow if the nearby Cotopaxi volcano erupts. After 73 years of deep slumber, the volcano started erupting in 2015. If its lava oozes out toward the river, the Quito rocket frogs will be boiled and gone. But there are some people trying to save the frog. Dr. Santiago Ron from Ecuador's Museum of Zoology says he and his team are currently sitting at a yellow alert, meaning the superficial activity of the volcano is low. Still, scientists have already collected 45 tadpoles and put them in a conservation facility. They will be kept here in case of an eruption, and that way they won't be lost forever. Volcano snail. The volcano snail is without a doubt the toughest gastropod in the entire world. The snail even looks like it belongs in a volcano. It has a black shell that looks more like a suit of iron armor, and it thrives inside the deadly environment of hydrothermal vents within the Indian Ocean. The volcano snail lives in the deepest parts of the hottest underwater volcanic vents found in the deep blue. Its shell is made of pure iron sulfide, which protects it from the extraordinary heat in which it thrives. For the first time in history, scientists recently sequenced the gastropod's full genome. This has been a scientific breakthrough from beginning to end. The snail was first discovered in 2001, living in the deep hydrothermal vent fields along the central Indian Ridge at a depth of around 1.5 miles. It was officially given a genus and a species over a decade later in 2015. Then, in 2020, scientists deciphered the genome to make sense of how the snail survives such a harsh environment, where the temperature reaches upwards of 750 degrees Fahrenheit. What the scientists found is that the snail has one very important gene called MTP-9. This gene makes it so that when the iron ions in the hot environment react with the sulfur growing naturally in the snail's scales, it creates the suit of armor that stops it from being boiled alive. Combative crabs. Scientists on the research vessel Thompson were studying an undersea volcano called the Axial Seamount. It's positively huge, and the most active submarine volcano in the Northeast Pacific Ocean. It's located about 300 miles from Cannon Beach in Oregon and sits at a depth of 4,626 feet. The last time it was active was in April of 2015. Having an active volcano so close to the shore of the United States is a pretty scary thing. And so, scientists are trying hard to figure out its secrets to see if they can predict when it will explode next. But their research was recently hampered by a blanket of crabs living on the volcano that refused to let the scientists do their job. These are spider crabs, and they live all over the volcano. According to Bill Chadwick, a volcanologist at Oregon State University, the researchers are always ready to be sabotaged by the crabs. Every time the scientists tried to put down one of their pieces of equipment, like a seismometer that would help study the movement and inner workings of the volcano, crabs would scuttle over it. There are millions of crabs down here living on the volcano, and they always make scientific expeditions a nightmare. As soon as something is put down, they use it as a perch. And while the team did manage to get their stuff down there, it's a gamble to see if it even works properly because there is so much crab interference. Giant woolly rat. Christopher Helgen is the curator of mammals at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. He is a biologist who recently teamed up with the Natural History Unit of the BBC to go on an expedition to a remote rainforest in Papua New Guinea. The place of interest was an extinct volcano called Mount Bosavi, located deep in the southern highlands. The crater of this gigantic volcano is over 2.5 miles wide, with its walls sloping up at least half a mile. Because the volcano is extinct and long since dormant, nature has taken hold inside the crater, and thanks to the crater's high walls, the life inside of it has been sheltered from the rest of the world. It's more of a cave than a crater, with the animals living inside totally isolated from the forest on the other side of the wall. Inside the crater of the volcano, Christopher and his team discovered a new species of rat. It turned out to be one of the biggest rats in the world, and only found living in this environment inside the volcano. It's a beast of a rodent, weighing up to 3.5 pounds and measuring nearly 3 feet long from the tip of its nose to the point of its tail. It's called the Bosavi woolly rat, and it lives on a diet of leaves and roots, building its dens in underground burrows within the crater. The maleo. The island of Sulawesi in Indonesia is one of the most biologically diverse places in the world, home to some of the most unique ecosystems that haven't yet been eviscerated by humans. The island is located just east of the more popular Borneo, and scientists love it here for the strange and wonderful animals. There are dwarf buffalo, all kinds of bizarre primates, and tusked pigs. Sulawesi was even home to a race of primitive hominins called Homo floresiensis. They lived until as recently as 15,000 years ago by some estimates, and grew to only be 3 feet tall. Scientists have compared them to real-life hobbits. But I'm here to talk about the maleo, which is a bird. The island is home to 400 species of bird which are not found anywhere else on the planet. One of them is the maleo, and it kind of looks like a really big chicken. These birds stand over 2 feet tall, have rosy red chest feathers, and have weird crests on their heads that look like helmets. They also live around volcanoes and lay their eggs in extremely warm volcanic soil to keep them hot and help them hatch faster. The nickname for the maleo is the volcanic bird, and for good reason. These spectacular birds have evolved in one of the most volcanic regions on the planet. Indonesia is right in the middle of the Ring of Fire, a truly terrifying place. The volcanoes erupt frequently, and the wildlife has evolved to deal with it. The maleo uses the volcanic activity to its benefit, laying its eggs in the hot soil. Nobody knows if it's because of the volcanic soil or just a special trait of the bird, but when the chicks hatch from their eggs, they can fly immediately. It's one of the only birds in the world that can do that. Galapagos volcano snakes. Finding snakes in the Galapagos Islands is not nearly as easy as finding lizards there. Sure, the archipelago is home to all kinds of reptiles like geckos and giant tortoises, but the snakes living here are extremely reclusive and very rarely seen. Charles Darwin collected the first Galapagos snake specimen in 1835, and almost nothing has been done to study them since. In 2015, Dr. Ortiz Catedral and her colleagues at the Galapagos National Park Directorate started studying the snakes, but they had a really hard time finding any. They went all across different islands, visited plenty of locations, including the tops of active volcanoes. They ended up finding roughly 400 specimens of snake over the course of several years. They also made a rather unusual discovery. The doctor and her team found that the Galapagos racer snake is a part-time cannibal. They found multiple instances of these Galapagos snakes eating each other when they got too hungry or too stressed out. Not only do the racer snakes slither around the tops of volcanoes, but they also seem to be stressed out about it, and so they eat their friends to calm down. The happy-faced spider. The happy-faced spider is an interesting arachnid that lives on the Hawaiian Islands. It's called the happy-faced spider because the pattern on its abdomen looks exactly like a smiley face. 2 black dots for eyes and a small black U for the mouth. When looking at the spider, it's almost like it's smiling back at you. It's also quite a unique creature because its color changes with its diet. Its color can be completely different depending on what food it just ate, because whatever it's metabolizing affects its skin. This is a totally bizarre evolutionary mechanism that's not seen in almost any other animals. The happy-faced spider doesn't live inside of any rumbling active volcanoes, not exactly near any lava, but they are one of the more interesting residents of Hawaii's Big Island, residing inside the volcanic island's rainforests. This spider can be found on the undersides of leaves and has adapted to life on an ever-growing island made of pure, hardened lava quite well.
Mount Vesuvius.
Living in the vicinity of Mount Vesuvius 2,000 years ago was not ideal. We learned this in 1748, when a group of explorers rediscovered the site of Pompeii, long after it was utterly destroyed by a volcanic eruption in the year 79 AD. This is when the city was buried under a blanket of volcanic ash. One witness to the eruption wrote that dust poured across the land like a flood, and that the city was cast into darkness. An estimated 2,000 people died almost instantly, preserved like marble statues amidst the dust and debris of their destroyed city. Pompeii was abandoned and forsaken as a place of curses and evil by the Romans, seen as a dead land where no one dared to go. However, at one time, Pompeii wasn't so grim. The city was settled by the Greeks around the 8th century BC. It was an independent town that kept to itself up until it fell under Roman influence in the 2nd century BC. Soon enough, the Bay of Naples became a popular destination for wealthy Romans. And by the time the 1st century AD rolled around, Pompeii was a resort city, almost like Puerto Vallarta or Cancun in Mexico. It was a place of elaborate villas, paved streets, sparkling water fountains, and rich vacation goers. There were about 12,000 people living in Pompeii on the night of the eruption, and the next day, there were 0. Antioch. Antioch, often considered the cradle of Christianity, is an ancient city that's been occupied since at least 300 BC. It originally served as the capital of the mighty Seleucid Empire, founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals named Seleucus. It then became the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and much later served as the capital of one of the 4 Crusader states during the First Crusade. Even after being destroyed by the Mongols in the 13th century, Antioch survived and is still alive today. However, the name has changed, and it's now known as the city of Antakya in Turkey. Surprisingly, it's still one of the most dangerous places to live in the entire world. The issue with Antioch is that it sits on one of the most volatile fault lines in the world. Because of this, it's been the victim of some of the most violent earthquakes in history. In the year 115 AD, 1900 years ago, an earthquake of about 7.5 magnitude nearly destroyed the entire city and 4 other ancient cities in the area. The earthquake was so immense it caused a tsunami that crashed into the city of Caesarea in Judea and almost pulled it into the ocean. The same thing happened just 400 years later in 526 AD. This earthquake was so bad, it's still considered one of the worst natural disasters in human history. About 250,000 people died as a result of the earthquake, which shook the ancient city apart. You'd think that after all these disasters, the area would be vacated, but this city is still populated today. Unfortunately, it continues to exist on the fault line, and it's way overdue for another earthquake. Japan's Waco pirates. The seas around East Asia were some of the most dangerous in the world until just recently. Starting around the 13th century, a group known only as the Waco began participating in what some might call violent pirate activity along the coastlines of Japan, Korea, and China. They operated specifically in the Sea of Japan and the East China Sea, but nobody is really sure who these people were. The pirates showed up about 500 years after the Vikings stopped pillaging the European coastline and many parts of Asia. It was around this time that a group of people, likely Japanese, took to a life of piracy. They terrorized coastal towns from the eastern edge of Korea all the way past the island of Taiwan. The exact history of the Waco pirates is murky at best, with some saying small bands began raiding as early as the 3rd century. They likely started out as disgruntled Japanese sailors who wanted more money. But then, over the years, the majority of these pirates became Chinese. Legitimate traders in China went broke because of new restrictions and taxes being implemented by the main government. Hard-pressed for money, these legitimate traders turned to illegal activities. The Waco pirate situation became quite serious by around 1405. There's records of a group of pirates being captured and deported to China, and they were executed in a boiling cauldron. The piracy continued throughout the 16th century and into the same time as the golden age of piracy in North America. Then, the Waco pirates began to fade away in the early 1700s until they vanished altogether. Jerusalem. Jerusalem has seen a lot of death throughout its long history. You were basically gambling with your own safety if you chose to live in Jerusalem because it was destroyed so frequently. The city was founded in 4500 BC and was seen as the holiest place on earth by every Abrahamic faith. Jerusalem has proved time and time again to be extremely dangerous, and on at least 2 occasions, the entire city was fully destroyed. On top of that, it's been attacked 52 times, besieged 23 times, and captured 44 times. The first major destruction came in 589 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacked the kingdom of Judah. Then, in 70 AD, it was fully destroyed again by the Romans. Jerusalem also saw a lot of action in the period of time between its 2 major annihilations. It was taken by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. After the Roman period came the Byzantine period. Then the Muslims occupied the city and conquered it in the 7th century. The First Crusade was launched in 1099 to take the city for the Christian Church. Once again, almost every resident of Jerusalem was slaughtered when the Crusaders entered its gates by force. If you lived in Jerusalem at any point during ancient history, you were never far away from being the victim of a total massacre. I want to say a big thank you to Ludmila Machado and Daniel Holland for supporting this channel. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. The streets of Rome. The city of Rome was one of the most dangerous places to live in the ancient world. Most historians like to romanticize what some consider the greatest city ever built, but the truth is that Rome was a violent and problematic place, specifically in the 1st century BC, during the reign of Julius Caesar, when there were about 1 million people living within city limits. Rich people, poor people, slaves, and foreigners from faraway lands all inhabited ancient Rome. It was one of the first truly multicultural metropolises on the planet 2,100 years ago, complete with slums and ghettos like you wouldn't believe. The city's temples, impressive columns, and plazas were definitely majestic, but the back streets were paved in blood. Outside the civic center, Rome was mostly a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and dark, dripping passages. There was no light, and there was nowhere to throw your waste except out your window and onto somebody's head as they walked along the street below. Rich people didn't venture out at night, or at least not without a private security team. Anyone with anything to lose typically stayed at home. That was, unless they wished to be beaten to death and robbed in an unlit alley by the starving Romans on the lowest tier of society. Slavery in Egypt. The Greeks, for all their philosophers and colorful mythologies, were some of the worst enforcers of slavery in human history. This was especially true during the Greek occupation of Egypt, which lasted from between 305 to 30 BC. It was one of the most despicable episodes in Egyptian history, and the area was dangerous for anyone who wasn't ethnically Greek. After Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, the descendants of Ptolemy I, one of his generals, ruled the land as kings. With Egypt firmly under Greek control, more and more Greek citizens poured into the country. They brought their slaves with them, and this changed the local dynamic quite a bit. During this time, slavery in the home boomed. Greeks loved having their slaves around them all the time. The majority of the slaves were from distant lands also under Greek rule and were not Egyptian. It's also important to note that Greeks were generally the only people who could afford slaves because the Egyptians were at the lowest end of the social ladder. Even though it was their country, they were the poorest and most unfortunate people during that time period. If you were Greek living in ancient Egypt, you were likely part of the upper class. If you were anything else, life was miserable and dangerous. And if you were a slave, life was even worse. Slaves were typically whipped for any transgression, and they were even branded on the forehead so they could never run away. A slave's only chance at living a decent life was to earn their freedom or to escape and risk being brutally punished. The Viking explosion. A volcanic eruption scared newly settled Vikings in Iceland so bad that they gave up their Norse gods and converted to Christianity. At least that's according to a new study by a team of researchers from the University of Cambridge. They investigated a volcanic eruption that occurred in the 10th century, which they say was the largest eruption in the island's history. The description of the disaster can be found in old medieval poems. However, the scientists went a step beyond that and used ice core samples to get an approximate date of 939 AD. According to researchers, the eruption continued for over 12 months without stopping. If this doesn't sound like the end of the world, I don't know what does. The date matches up perfectly with the first 2 generations of Viking settlers in Iceland. Some of the earliest people to live on the island, who arrived as children, witnessed the eruption with their own eyes. The impact of the eruption was enough to make the settlers believe that the mythical Ragnarok was coming. In ancient medieval texts, writers explained how the eruption in Iceland marked the death of the pagan gods and the rise of the Christian god. The authors of this study say that following the eruption, there would have been many years of darkness, cold, and very strange times for the Vikings. They really may have thought their gods died in Ragnarok, and this likely helped push future generations to accept Christianity as their new religion. The destruction of Sodom. The story of Sodom is well known to most people, even if they don't believe in the Bible. God was so disturbed by the sinful things going on in the city of Sodom that he destroyed it with fire and brimstone. In the book of Genesis, it says, "The smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace." God brought his fury down on the sinners, annihilating their city as if by an atomic bomb. That makes the city of Sodom one of the worst places to live during biblical days, or 3,600 years ago. In modern times, archaeologists have identified the ruins of Tal el-Hammam as the true city of Sodom. Even more recently, researchers discovered that the city was destroyed in the blink of an eye by a meteorite. The annihilation was so fast and so fiery that it likely served as the inspiration for the biblical story of Sodom that came later. Archaeologists found proof that the city was destroyed in a scorching fireball in 1650 BC. They found evidence of pottery melted into an ooze, and they unearthed human beings who had been ripped apart as if they were exploded by grenades. During the natural disaster, the city was covered in fires, which burned their grain, singed clothing, melted roof clay, and pulverized stone. Many of the melted materials require temperatures upward of 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit to fully melt. The only logical conclusion scientists can come up with is that a meteorite entered the atmosphere and caused a cosmic airburst, equivalent to about 1,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. The deadly quake. The deadliest earthquake in the history of China happened almost 500 years ago. On January 23, 1556, Shaanxi became the worst place on the planet to live. About 830,000 people died. It's difficult enough to count the casualties in a modern disaster, never mind one from the 16th century. But regardless, the quake is still considered the deadliest natural disaster in human history. It struck late at night and had a magnitude between 8.0 and 8.3, which isn't the strongest tremor ever recorded. However, it did occur in the middle of an extremely populated area. Because this was 1556, buildings weren't exactly built up to be able to withstand earthquakes. In the city of Huaxian, every single house collapsed. Every structure, temple, and building crumbled to the ground. This disaster resulted in about half the city's residents dying within just a few minutes. In some places, crevices opened up in the ground that were 60 feet deep. But that wasn't all. The earthquake caused chaos and widespread death for 300 miles in every direction. It even triggered landslides, washing away entire neighborhoods and settlements. The fall of Egypt. The people of ancient Egypt were going through a very tough time during the last few centuries of their existence. It was one of the worst places in the ancient world to be living between about 300 BC and the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC, ending the reign of what we call ancient Egypt. But what's really interesting is that scientists believe they may have found the cause for ancient Egypt's ugly fall from grace. They believe a major volcanic eruption happened on the other side of the world, triggering a severe drought along the Nile. This drought ultimately led to the famine that devastated Egyptian society, allowing them to be so easily defeated by the Roman army. The discovery came from the ancient city of Berenice, located on the Red Sea. The lost city was found in 1994, but recent excavations have revealed something shocking. Berenice was originally founded around 275 BC, and then it was abandoned just a couple decades later. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of a well, which they say dried up around 220 BC. This points to a very obvious drought that most definitely plagued the Egyptians. Scientists believe it was because a volcanic eruption occurred either in Mexico, Japan, or on the island of Martinique. The eruption was so extreme it interrupted the annual monsoon and prevented rain from replenishing the Nile. In even simpler terms, the volcano distorted weather patterns, changing the climate and leading to the fall of ancient Egypt. Thanks for watching! Which of these places would you have dared to live during ancient times? The secret beneath the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is one of the holiest places in the world, situated in the city of Jerusalem. It's regarded with great respect by Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and has been for thousands of years. The Temple Mount itself isn't underground. It's a flat plaza surrounded by a few stubby retaining walls that were built in the 1st century BC by King Herod. There is no physical temple here because it was destroyed by the Romans. The temple built by King Herod was constructed to replace the original temple built by King Solomon in 957 BC. Both were obliterated, and only small pieces of the walls remain, with the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock being the only structures standing in the ruins. However, there's more underground that is still hiding beneath the surface. In 1864, a team of British surveyors began to examine the polluted water supply that was making people in the holy city sick. They were given unprecedented access to places all over Jerusalem because they needed to figure out a way to keep the water flowing. They soon learned that most of the water tanks needed to be abandoned because they were very outdated, but they also made some unexpected archaeological discoveries along the way. They examined tanks hiding underneath the Temple Mount and found an underground temple structure. Extensive investigation showed that beneath Temple Mount are water cisterns that were converted from earlier ruins of what appeared to be subterranean mosques and unidentified buried temples. Unfortunately, Temple Mount is considered too holy of a place to dig up. There does appear to be something down there, but there is no way anyone will allow an excavation to take place. Maybe in the future they can use technology to perform a non-invasive scan? The Gujarat stepwells. India's underground water temples resemble something straight from a fantasy novel. The mysterious stepwells of Gujarat are not temples dedicated to any deities. They are architectural marvels that date back over 1,000 years. The stepwells were built starting around 600 AD, and there are over 120 of them in India. These are inverted temples dug deep into the ground like massive well shafts, but a little more sophisticated. They were used to collect water in ancient times during the monsoon season. When the monsoon poured down, the water would be collected in these megalithic underground structures. With a huge supply of water, the locals could walk down the staircase and collect it in jugs to bring back home. These water temples allowed entire communities to survive the brutal seasons without rain. These stepwells were also used for socialization and bathing. In the scorching heat of summer, locals could gather in an underground temple where it was significantly cooler. They would also cool off by taking a bath, which turned the temple water a little bit dirty. I don't know, would you risk it? Let me know in the comments below. Mogao Caves. One of the largest, most spectacular, and least known underground sanctuaries in the world is a place called the Mogao Caves, sometimes known as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. It's a system of almost 500 temples, built at what was once a crossroad on the legendary Silk Road. The history here spans a whopping 1,000 years, with the Buddhist sanctuaries carved into solid rock. Here you can find at least 492 cells that were used for the monks' dwellings. The caves are located near the Dunhuang Oasis in China's Gansu province. According to UNESCO World Heritage, the Mogao Caves contain the largest and longest used treasure house of Buddhist art anywhere. Construction began in 366 AD and continued up until the 14th century. Within the treasure house are 2,000 painted sculptures, many of them still almost as vivid as the day they were finished. The artwork depicts images of camels pulling carts along the Silk Road, workers in the fields toiling for food, and warriors fighting in great battles. What's really interesting here is that we can see how Buddhist art and culture changed century by century. By dating the sculptures and various scenes painted inside the caverns, we can start to put together a kind of tapestry of history. In 1990, researchers stumbled upon a cave unlike any other. They call it the Library Cave because it contained tens of thousands of manuscripts, hailed as the Oriental version of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The manuscripts have since been examined by experts who have learned significant information about the complex history of ancient China. The cave stopped being used as a Buddhist sanctuary around the year 1930, and by then, all the monks had left, and the place was largely forgotten. The Hypogeum. The Hypogeum in Malta is arguably one of the best preserved prehistoric places in the world. It's an impressive underground complex that includes a temple, a cemetery, and a funeral home. It dates back 6,000 years to a time when humans in the Mediterranean were starting to contemplate the afterlife. In 4000 BC, the people of Malta began to create their own rituals surrounding the death of their loved ones. They put their energy together to create one of the first megalithic tombs, which would later become the Haus Afflieni Hypogeum. The builders carved through 3 miles of limestone underneath what is now the capital city of Valletta. They incorporated natural caverns into their design, and over the centuries continued to dig deeper, building as they went. The temple they constructed here would be in use for the next 1,500 years. During that time, megalithic structures began to appear on the surface all around the Hypogeum. This underground temple and cemetery was the beginning of a wave of stone circles and ritual structures across Malta. The majority of ritual activity took place in the middle level of the underground structure. Inside the oracle room, a chamber that measures more than 15 feet long, there are niches in the walls that work to amplify sound like in an amphitheater. Nobody knows what went on in this secret chamber, but it likely had to do with acoustics. The lowest level of the structure reaches 33 feet into the earth and is made up of 5 spaces, each less than 16 feet in diameter. These spaces allow access to smaller rooms that once served as mass graves. Pretty spooky, right? Wealthiest Hindu temple. The Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple is considered by the Guinness World Records to be the wealthiest Hindu temple in India. It may even be the richest Hindu temple in the world. And it's all thanks to a series of secret underground cellars discovered beneath the temple containing a staggering treasure of gold, silver, and gemstones. This temple is located in the Indian state of Kerala, and it was dedicated to the deity Vishnu when it was built between the 6th and 9th centuries. It's one of the most important places in the Hindu religion, just like how St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City is one of the most important churches in Catholicism. The Kingdom of Travancore ruled the area briefly starting in 1729. Legends circulated ever since that they hid an enormous amount of wealth inside vaults underneath the temple. Then, in 2011, researchers made headlines when they discovered treasure inside secret underground chambers. But it was controversial from the start. Some said the treasure was cursed and that the vaults shouldn't be opened. Some feared they were full of cobras, and the first person inside would be bitten to death. In the end, the chambers were opened anyway, and all the treasure was taken. Thankfully, nobody was bitten by cobras. There was so much treasure that an underground museum had to be built just to show it all off. The Temple Under the House. Not every underground temple has to be ancient. Levon Arakelian was the mastermind behind his own personal temple, and his story starts in 1985. He was 44 years old when his wife asked him to dig a potato storage pit underneath their home in a small Armenian village. It seemed like a good idea, so Levon started digging. However, he wouldn't stop for the next 23 years. According to Levon himself, he experienced a series of religious visions and dreams. In these visions, he was told by a voice to keep digging. And as he listened, working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, his chisel began to form a luxurious temple in the solid black basalt rock. There is now a huge underground temple beneath Levon's house, reaching a shocking depth of nearly 66 feet. There are 7 interconnected rooms within the structure itself. There is also a staircase made from solid stone, and walls decorated in mosaics and sculptures. If you didn't know this thing was built recently, you would think it was thousands of years old. Levon continued to work on his project until the day he died in 2008 at the age of 67. He suffered a heart attack, which his wife said was likely due to the hard work and lack of rest. Still, the temple is underneath the house, and it's now a popular tourist attraction. Underground Church. The largest underground church in Europe is the Church of Saint-Jean at Albert-sur-Dronne. It's a massive subterranean structure that was carved by hand out of a solid rock hill in the 12th century. Few underground churches can compare to the brilliance of the Church of Saint-Jean. Without physically being inside the church, it's difficult to understand just how big it really is. The main room has 2 huge columns that rise 60 feet to the ceiling. There's a winding stairway carved perfectly out of the rock, leading to an upper viewing room where you can look down into the main chamber through an interior window. According to legend, the underground church was originally built as a holding place for religious artifacts. A Roman reliquary, a container for holy relics, was discovered by fighters in the First Crusade, suggesting the church was used by the Romans long before the Christians, or at least long before the Romans became Christians. The church also contains a small cemetery adjacent to the main room that holds 80 sarcophagi, most of which are 800 years old or more. Definitely want to put this place on my bucket list. Has anybody been here? Let me know in the comments below. The Underground Shrine of Paestum. There is an underground shrine in southern Italy and nobody knows what it's there for. It's in the ancient city of Paestum, originally occupied by the Greeks over 2,500 years ago. The shrine has been dated to roughly 510 BC. It's small and embedded in the ground so that it looks like somebody's tiny house was buried in an avalanche. The shrine is situated between the Roman Forum and the Temple of Athena, near the Via Sacra, the main street of ancient Rome. There was originally an entrance to the shrine, but it was only used briefly to place ritual offerings inside. Then the entrance was sealed off, and the shrine was purposely buried. When archaeologists excavated the structure, they found the remains of something that looked like a bed. They also discovered vessels filled with what may have been honey, and a small collection of ancient bronze jars that must have been worth a fortune. The shrine was identified in 1952, and impatient archaeologists entered it by smashing through the roof, all because they couldn't find the buried doorway. The best guess anyone has these days is that the shrine was a symbolic tomb of an unknown hero. First, it was a sacred shrine, then later it was buried to emulate a tomb without a body. All of the artifacts and offerings that were found inside of it are now on display at the Archaeological Museum in Paestum. The Sinca Veche Temple Cave. Nobody knows what the purpose of the Sinca Veche Temple Cave was. It's also a mystery as to who built it, and the strange deity that was worshipped within it is also unknown. The cave can be found on the outskirts of the small Roman village of Sinca Veche. It's such an odd and obscure place that the locals often refer to it as the Temple of Destiny. The site has been there for roughly 7,000 years, placing it way before the Romans ever formed their republic. And yet it was used by many different types of people throughout the centuries. There is a weird collection of religious symbols inside the underground structure. There you can find the yin-yang symbol from China and the Star of David. However, there are no Christian crosses here, even though there is other evidence of Christian habitation. Although the structure is underground, light penetrates its dusty depths through a series of chimney-like skylights. Some believe the chimneys weren't meant to allow light in, but to let in holy energy from outside. Many people who visit this place say they can feel a kind of supernatural energy humming inside their bodies. Unfortunately, we still don't know the true history of the cave temple. There are some historical records from 1700 saying it was used to bury monks from Transylvania. However, there are also rumors that it was inhabited by alchemists in the medieval ages and was used by Jews as a place of worship centuries earlier. The London Mithraeum. The London Mithraeum is the most impressive Roman sanctuary of Mithras outside Rome itself. It's an ancient temple dedicated to the mystery god known as Mithras, who captivated the world as a secret underground deity over 2,000 years ago. Mithras has origins in ancient Iran, and he was the Persian god of light, justice, and the sun. He was worshipped as far back as 1400 BC, maybe even earlier. He became one of the head figures of Zoroastrianism, a much older religion than Christianity Islam, or even Judaism. It was around the same time that Christ was born that the cult of Mithras became sensational throughout the Roman Empire. They took inspiration from the Iranian deity and created their own Roman-style secret religion. It was so covert they had 7 grades of initiation, as if those who wanted to worship had to join a fraternity. There were communal rituals, and the practitioners of the faith met in highly exclusive underground temples all the way from Roman Syria to Roman Britain. Unfortunately, the Romans didn't write anything about the Mithraic mysteries down. It was against the rules to record what happened during the rituals, and so we have no written evidence of what went on with the cult of Mithras. But we do have Mithraeums scattered throughout the world. The one in London was discovered during construction in 1945. The temple was originally thought to be a Christian church, but they eventually found out that it was built in the 3rd century AD by a cult group of Mithraic worshippers.
Attacked by a great white shark. Chantal Doyle was rescued from a terrifying shark attack by her partner, who punched the predator in the face. It was in the summer of 2020 that the couple was relaxing at a beach near Port Macquarie in New South Wales when everything went terribly wrong. Chantal grabbed her surfboard and went to ride some waves. Everything was going swimmingly. And then a great white shark tried to bite off her leg. She was on her board when the shark sunk its teeth into her right calf, knocking her into the water. The great white was going in for another bite when Mark, Chantal's boyfriend, got between them and punched the animal right in the nose. Would you be brave enough to do that? Mark's quick thinking may have saved his girlfriend's life. The shark did not enjoy getting its nose punched and was surprised enough that it gave up the attack. Nearby surfers and lifeguards were able to get Chantal to shore without further incident, and she was taken to the nearest hospital. But the damage was already done. Even though the shark had only bit her once on the leg, it left its mark. It took 2 years of surgery and rehabilitation before she started regaining strength in her leg. She suffered severe nerve damage and even after 2 years remained partially paralyzed. Chantal was getting frustrated with her slow recovery and chronic pain, and so she decided to take up boxing. She wasn't going to give up. She took a grueling 12-week training course to get in shape for a charity boxing match. Despite her scary experience with the great white, Chantal is still in love with the ocean and wants to protect sharks and their habitat. In fact, she says the encounter has given her a greater understanding and passion for ocean conservation, and hopes the charity boxing match will help raise more awareness. How do you think you would handle getting bitten by a great white shark? Let me know in the comments. I don't know if I would handle it that well. Canadian black bear. On October 3, 2022, a family of 4 were hiking along the Nordic ski trail system on Bear Mountain just before 7 p.m. Hiking at a place called Bear Mountain at night when the sun has gone down is probably not the best thing to do with your family. According to the BC Conservation Officer Service, the family was attacked by a bear, resulting in 2 women being critically injured. Bear Mountain is located near the northern British Columbian town of Dawson Creek. It's in the wild Canadian north, where bears can be seen simply wandering down the side of the road. Going into the forest here is asking to meet a bear, especially in late fall when the sun sets early in the afternoon. As the family was wandering along the trail, they came face to face with a black bear. They turned and tried to run, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to do when you see a bear. As a public service announcement, remember to never turn your back on a bear and run away. This turns you into prey, which makes the bear want to eat you even more. The bear gave chase, mauled the first woman it caught, and then attacked another woman and a teenage boy who tried to help the first victim. Somehow the family was able to call for help. When police officers arrived on the scene of the attack, they found the bear guarding the bodies of its victims. It mauled these people and then hung around to guard them like a lion with a fresh kill. The police were forced to put the bear down, and the victims were taken to a hospital. One victim was in such desperate condition she needed to be airlifted to Edmonton, while the others were taken to the local hospital in Dawson Creek. Good news, all 3 were expected to survive. Have you ever run into a bear in the wild? What did you do? Let us know in the comments. Anaconda attack. A fishing guide in Brazil got a bit more than he bargained for when an anaconda jumped out of the water and tried to eat him. The shocking clip of the incident was uploaded in summer of 2022, showing 38-year-old João Severino on the receiving end of an anaconda surprise attack. João is an angling expert. He had a boat full of tourists in the Brazilian state of Goiás, traveling down a local river when suddenly he noticed a massive anaconda beside the boat. The snake was curled around some stumps, lurking at the bottom of the river. Anacondas are notorious for using waterways in the Amazon jungle to get around, since it's much easier to move their huge bulk underwater than over land. And although anacondas are the biggest snakes in the world, they don't typically attack humans. That's more of a myth than anything, with almost no anaconda fatalities reported. Far more people are killed by reticulated pythons than anacondas. This is why what happened next was so surprising. As João and the tourists were busy filming the anaconda in the wild, it suddenly poised itself to strike. The huge behemoth of a snake then lunged out of the water and tried to sink its fangs into the tour guide. Luckily though, it didn't penetrate João's skin. He screamed in surprise and nearly fell off the boat, but he never even got so much as a scratch. Still, it was a terrifying encounter that nobody had expected. A big shout out to Jesse Hayland and Terry Lynn Gunshire. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. And let us know if you've ever had a scary encounter with a wild animal. Attack of the sailfish. In the summer of 2022, a senior citizen from Maryland traveled to Florida to go on a fishing trip. Sadly for the 73-year-old woman, it would be the worst fishing trip of her life. She was gored by a gigantic sailfish that jumped from the water and almost stabbed her to death. The victim was with two other people early on a Tuesday morning fishing off the coast of Florida near Stuart. One of the anglers on board caught a sailfish on their line. As the fishermen tried to reel it in, things started to get a little strange. The enormous fish, which weighed about 100 pounds, was charging the boat. It was trying to smash itself free. Then, without any warning, the fish exploded out of the water and stabbed the woman in the groin area with its pointy snout. The victim had been standing near the console of the boat, directly in the fish's path. According to the Martin County Sheriff's Office, the men on board did their best to take care of the woman. They put pressure on her wound, immediately turned the boat around, and met authorities once they hit land. The victim, later identified as Catherine Perkins, was flown to HCA Florida Lawnwood Hospital. She was extremely lucky. Catherine was seriously injured, but she did survive. Stoned by monkeys. An elderly man in India was killed by a pack of rampaging monkeys in 2018. According to his family, the victim was stoned to death while collecting dry wood in his village, located in India's Uttar Pradesh. He was identified as 72-year-old Dharampal Singh, a perfectly ordinary man who hadn't anticipated anything horrifying happening in his day. But as he collected dry wood in his village, a group of monkeys started taunting him. The monkeys were taking loose bricks from a nearby building and throwing them at the old man. He tried to escape but was beaten by the rambunctious primates who continued to throw bricks until Dharampal couldn't run anymore. It was like an old-fashioned stoning from the Dark Ages, only by monkeys. Following the horrific and bizarre incident, the victim's family lodged a complaint. They said even though the monkeys were responsible for his death, the authorities registered his case as an accident. His family was trying to get revenge for Dharampal's death by having the rogue monkeys held accountable for murder. It was an extraordinarily strange case, but the cops insisted it was just an accident and could have happened to anybody. The local police had absolutely no interest in pressing charges against the monkeys. The violent elephant. At a wildlife park in Malaysia, a pygmy elephant gored its handler to death on Christmas Day 2022. According to conservation officials, Joe Fred Lansu was working with an injured calf when an adult elephant suddenly turned on him. Joe was trying to take care of the baby elephant, but the older elephant must have misinterpreted the situation. The elephant charged at Joe, slammed its tusk through his chest, impaling him so that he died almost instantly. It was the equivalent to having a giant steel rod slammed through his abdomen. The tragedy happened at Lok Kawi Wildlife Park on the island of Borneo, a sanctuary for almost 20 endangered pygmy elephants. The park, which you might call a necessity for the survival of these endangered animals, only has 6 staff members to take care of them. It's not the best-paying job. It's located deep in the jungle, and employees run the risk of being killed by the elephants. Crocodile holiday. When an American tourist was vacationing in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, he had an unfortunate encounter with an oversized reptile. And when his friend jumped in to help, his friend was also viciously attacked by the savage beast. It happened on a Monday night in July of 2022. According to the report from CBS News, one of the tourists decided it was a good idea to go for a swim in the ocean in the middle of the night, long after the sun had set. The first man waded into the water and was immediately greeted by a crocodile. He suffered serious bites to his legs, arm, abdomen, and chest. The crocodile was essentially trying to chew him while still alive. The second man, identified only as a 30-year-old from somewhere in Colorado, then jumped into the water to help. Thankfully, the assistance from the second man saved the first man's life, even if the helper suffered a serious wound and nearly lost his hand. Both men walked away from the encounter with their lives, and undoubtedly with a newfound fear for aquatic reptilians. The deadly leopard seal. Kirsty Brown was a member of the British Antarctic Survey in 2003 when she was fatally attacked by a leopard seal. It was the first ever recorded fatality caused by a leopard seal in human history. Up until 2003, leopard seals were seen as primarily peaceful when interacting with humans. Although the seals are powerful predators, they always seemed fond of people. Kirsty was snorkeling in Antarctica when one of them snapped. It suddenly became violent, turned on Kirsty, and used its immense strength to take her life. Kirsty was only 28 years old when she went on the expedition. She and 21 other scientists were spending their winter at the Rothera Research Station. This is a base of operations for all breeds of scientists, people studying everything from biology to atmospheric science. As an experienced diver, Kirsty wanted to get some snorkeling time with the animals. She was in one of the bays of Adelaide Island when the leopard seal dragged her underwater. One of her team members heard her scream, then she was gone. A rescue boat was launched, but they couldn't get her out of the water for 10 minutes. And by then, all attempts at resuscitation proved futile. As for the motivation behind the surprise attack, nobody really knows. Scottish zoologist Dr. Ian Boyd was the man behind the inquiry into her death. He said there were 3 potential reasons for the attack. Kirsty may have been mistaken for prey, she may have frightened the animal with her presence, or the seal may have stalked and killed her on purpose. Why do you think the seal attacked Kirsty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Fist fight with a fox. An 89-year-old woman in central Maine got into a fistfight with a fox in November of 2022. She was taking a leisurely stroll through a condo development in Auburn when the fox came out of nowhere. This is a nice area with expensive homes and large patches of forest. She was on a main road walking past people's driveways in the middle of the afternoon when the fox approached. Without any warning, it grabbed her with its teeth and yanked her to the ground. It was literally a surprise attack by a fox, and the woman had to fight back to keep it from gnawing her face off. It's lucky she was in such a populated area because one of the neighbors saw what was happening and chased the animal off with a metal rod. By the time police arrived, the fox was long gone. The elderly woman suffered over 24 cuts and puncture wounds from the violent fox. As far as we know, the fox got away free and is still at large. Bear in the garden. In 2022, a young boy was playing in his grandparents' garden in Connecticut when he was dragged away by a vicious black bear. James Butler, the grandfather of the young boy, was there when the surprise attack unfolded. His grandson was playing near the trampoline when the bear burst through the thick woods behind the house and went straight for him. The kid yelled, "Bear!" And when James looked up, his grandson was already in the bear's mouth and being dragged across the lawn. It was like a bear kidnapping. It was as if the animal came out of the woods on purpose to kidnap the child and take him back to its cave. Even though James Butler uses a wheelchair, he went straight into action mode to rescue his grandson. He picked up a metal bar and threw it at the bear, yelled, made noise, and did everything he could without physically being able to fight the beast. Luckily, the neighbors heard the screaming, raced over to the garden, and managed to help save the boy by threatening the bear with a metal pipe. The bear finally gave up, dropped the kid, and left. Good thing there's all these metal pipes and rods around. But the bear wasn't gone for long. It came back, walked straight up to the door, and stared at everyone through the screen. They couldn't even leave their house to get the boy to the hospital because the bear was stalking them. It wasn't until the police showed up that the family was able to get out of there. Police officers had no choice but to put the dangerous creature down. And as for the boy, he did make a full recovery.
Spider horror. The Brazilian wandering spider is one of the most dangerous arachnids on the planet. A man named Gil Wisen was unfortunate enough to come across one of these deadly spiders in his bedroom in eastern Ecuador. He walked into his room to discover a gigantic wandering spider on the wall with hundreds, maybe thousands of its tiny offspring crawling across the floor and walls as if they were coming into the room through cracks in the plaster. When Gil looked underneath his bed, he found their nest. The mother laid eggs below his bed, then the baby spiders hatched and started their life by crawling up his walls. Gil took a photograph, titled it The Spider Room, and went on to win the Wildlife Photographer of the Year award for urban wildlife. The mother spider was roughly the size of a human hand, although it appears much bigger in the photograph due to the forced perspective. The Brazilian wandering spider can grow to nearly 12 inches long and delivers a deadly neurotoxic venom. It's a good thing Gil was able to capture the spider and get it out of the house, because if not, he could have died. A fatal attack. There was only a single fatal shark attack in America in 2022. That's out of 51 recorded attacks, mostly in Florida. The only one that proved fatal happened in Hawaii. A woman from Washington state traveled to Hawaii for what should have been an amazing vacation. She took the opportunity to go snorkeling off the coast of the Big Island near Keauakapu Point on December 8th. She went with her husband, who was snorkeling only a few feet away, when suddenly he lost track of his wife. She wasn't where she had been a second ago, although there was a shark about 50 yards away with blood around its gills. Not the best case scenario for the husband. He sounds pretty suspicious too. Oh yeah, we were snorkeling and then suddenly my wife disappeared. Several days went by before officials finally confirmed that while her husband snorkeled nearby, the woman was attacked and killed by a shark. Eyewitnesses came forward to say they saw the whole thing. The woman was snatched by the shark and dragged away. Moments later, the shark appeared in a different spot, feasting on something inside a cloud of murky red water. It's unclear what species of shark committed this heinous act. It was likely a tiger shark, although it also could have been a bull shark or even a great white. And although this was the only fatal attack in the US in 2022, that wasn't the only instance of a shark gone wrong. A 17-year-old cheerleader named Addison Bethea had her leg bitten off by a shark while swimming at the beach in Florida. And in November, a woman from California almost had the same thing happen at Del Mar Beach in San Diego. Fending off a mountain lion. A teenager in Nevada recently walked away from a surprise encounter with a deadly mountain lion with nothing but scratches. The girl took her dog for a walk in a small Reno neighborhood on November 10, 2022. As she walked her dog, she was approached by the ferocious cat. The most shocking part about it was that the cat approached her in a heavily populated neighborhood. This isn't the kind of place where people need to be worried about cougar attacks. Ashley Sanchez from the Nevada Department of Wildlife says mountain lions are extremely elusive and rare to see, so this was a freak event. The exact details of the attack are a little blurry since the teen wasn't interested in talking to reporters. Can you blame her? We know that the big cat was likely after her small dog. However, it had to go through the teenager to get at the dog. The mountain lion pounced, tried to swipe the girl with one of its paws, then chickened out and ran away. The girl's screams were enough to frighten the mountain lion off, leaving her and the dog perfectly fine. It was an extremely close encounter that could have turned deadly. In the aftermath of the attack, wildlife officials hunted the mountain lion down and euthanized it for public safety. Still, there are plenty of other big cats lurking in the sparse wilderness of Nevada, and any one of them might come into town at night, searching for a meal. Big shout out to Shona McIntosh and Kelly Ciarino. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family, and let us know if you've had any scary animal encounters. Saved by a bear. On January 22, 2019, Casey Lynn Hathaway disappeared in North Carolina from his grandmother's home. The boy was only 3 years old, and the temperature outside was well below freezing. The grandmother freaked out. The parents were called. The FBI and the Marines stationed at nearby bases got involved in the search. It was a huge ordeal. Local officials, state officials, and ordinary citizens all came out to scour the woods in search of little Casey. He was finally discovered 2 days later in a bush, lethargic and hungry, but otherwise perfectly fine. So, how did such a small child survive in the forest alone for so long? According to the boy, he was saved by a wild bear. The boy claimed he was taken care of by a bear for 2 full days before his rescuers found him. The bear kept him warm through the night so that he didn't freeze to death, and it kept him from being attacked by predators like wolves. We have no idea if this really happened. There was a lot of speculation after the boy was discovered. Some said God sent an angel in disguise as a bear to watch over the child. Others said the boy made the story up because he was traumatized. But wildlife experts admitted there really could have been a bear involved, one whose maternal instinct caused her to protect the boy from the harsh weather and merciless predators. Attack of the Orca. In Portugal, a group of ornery orcas sank a boat, ripped off its rudder, and nearly killed the people on the vessel. The French sailboat went down in early November 2022 during an unprecedented orca rampage in the region. Since 2020, orcas, also known as killer whales, have been targeting sailboats off the coast of Spain and Portugal. Sometimes the orcas approach the sailboats innocently. Sometimes they attack with extreme prejudice. Nobody seems to know if the orcas are fed up with humans and their annoying boats, or if these have just been freak accidents. Whatever the case, many boats have recently been sunk by the angry animals. The French sailboat in Portugal had 4 passengers on board. They were 14 miles from Viana do Castelo when 6 orca whales surrounded them. The whales went for the rudder, shook it loose, and ripped it off the boat, and kept biting until there was a loud crack. The whales purposely bit chunks out of the boat until it started to sink. Then they swam away like thieves fleeing the scene of the crime. Nobody was injured during the shocking encounter. A rescue boat arrived quickly enough to save those on board before the boat fully sank. Marine experts believe the pod of killer whales that attacked the sailboat could be the same group responsible for all the attacks over the past almost 3 years. There could be a rogue pod of whales with a vendetta against sailboats. Rhino charge. A rhinoceros in India tried to cross the road and crashed into an oncoming truck. It happened in October 2022 inside the Kaziranga National Park and was amazingly caught on video. The truck was speeding in the Bagari area when the rhino exploded out of the trees on the roadside and tried to cross the 2 lanes of asphalt. The truck saw the rhinoceros and tried to swerve out of the way, but the rhino kept on running. The rhino crashed into the side of the truck, but the truck kept going. It was difficult to say who hit who. Officials with the Forest Department intercepted the vehicle and gave the driver a fine for going too fast in rhino territory. Rhinos are considered special, sacred animals in India and are not to be harmed by anyone. Even though the rhino survived, the driver of the truck had to be made an example out of for putting the rhino in danger by driving too fast. Just imagine being on your way to work and having a rhino collide with the side of your vehicle. That would be one exciting commute. The rare black leopard. An amateur British photographer had one of the most surprisingly amazing encounters of his life in September of 2022. Steve Darling, 74, was on a safari in Kenya when he witnessed an extremely rare black leopard out at night stalking its prey. The leopard wasn't hunting Steve, but a dik-dik antelope. The safari was Steve's first trip after the lockdown. He was very lucky to witness the elusive leopard in the flesh, while he and the group made their way back to camp. The young female leopard is named Giza, which is the Swahili word for darkness. She's almost impossible to see in the night because her black coat makes her blend in with the darkness of the savannah. Steve was never in any danger, but the antelope Giza was hunting certainly was. Steve was able to watch as the black leopard hunted and killed the antelope, then dragged it up into an acacia tree to eat. When she finished her meal after about 2 hours, the leopard climbed down from the tree and melted away into the night. The bull elk's harem. In October 2022 in Estes Park, Colorado, a clueless tourist got on the wrong side of a bull elk and nearly paid for the mistake with his life. This guy narrowly avoided disaster with the massive animal who was protecting his harem. Another visitor to the park, Megan Foster, captured the unpleasant encounter on video and uploaded it online. Too many people in the park had crowded the gigantic bull elk, frantically taking pictures of the normally quiet and docile animal. But this was in the middle of mating season, when bull elk defend their females from rival bulls who want a piece of the action. These bulls compete for dominance by fighting with their massive antlers. It's an exciting thing to witness, but only from a safe distance. The National Park Service recommends staying far enough away that you need to use binoculars to watch. These tourists were not standing far enough away, and one of them got way too close. He irritated the elk so bad that it pretended to charge him, psyching the guy out and causing him to fall over. The man was able to get up and give the animal the space it needed, but he just about wound up getting gored by the elk's horns. Mauled in the backyard. A woman in Vermont was mauled by a bear in her own backyard one late night in November 2022. It was a little before 10 in the town of Winhall when Sarah Deedle, 43 years old, let her Shih Tzu outside to do its business. Her tiny dog then chased a bear cub that was in the yard with its mother straight up a tree, causing the mama bear to get really mad. The mama bear came charging out of the dark and tackled Sarah, who had just been trying to figure out what in the world was happening. The bear grabbed hold of her and was ready to tear her apart when her friend clobbered the beast over the head with a flashlight. Robert was able to pull Sarah into the house just seconds before the bear charged at the door and tried to rip it off its hinges. Robert managed to slam the door in the bear's face before it could get inside. And although Sarah had to receive 15 staples in her scalp, she walked away from the terrifying encounter with her life. She also suffered a mangled hand and many cuts to her face and abdomen. According to the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, bear sightings in Vermont have reached the highest ever recorded. Officials are strongly urging citizens to make sure their yards are lit at night before they let their pets out, and to not leave any food outside that might attract hungry bears. Monster octopus. A Hawaiian fisherman just broke a 20-year record for catching a monstrous octopus. Michael Matsunaga, a local from the island of Oahu, caught the octopus on the morning of August 30th, 2022 in Turtle Bay. He was practicing something called bottom fishing, which is when you drop your bait all the way to the bottom of the water to try and snag fish near the sea floor. Michael was fishing at 400 feet when he suddenly nabbed something huge. There was a brief struggle to get the creature onto his boat, and then an even bigger struggle with the creature in his boat. With its 8 arms, the gigantic octopus refused to stay still. Michael eventually got it into a cooler, but the thing kept forcing its way out and trying to escape. In the end, Michael got the preposterously massive sea monster back to shore. It was weighed using an official scale at 25.95 pounds. That is the state record in Hawaii for the biggest octopus ever captured. The previous record was almost 7 pounds lighter, showing just how beastly this 8-legged cephalopod really was. Sadly for the oversized octopus, Michael told reporters he was planning to boil it in beer one leg at a time. Keep in mind that just because the octopus was the biggest ever caught in Hawaii doesn't make it the biggest in the world. The much larger, giant Pacific octopus weighs over 600 pounds and can grow to be 30 feet across. Thanks for watching! Which animal would you be most terrified of meeting in the wild? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and come back soon. Bye!